Target any number of monsters in your graveyard, special summon them, and if you do, you lose 1000 life points for each monster special summoned by this effect. You cannot conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this card. You can only activate one Soul Charge per turn. So Soul Charge is a card that came out very recently in the set Dragons of Legend. For anyone who's been living under a rock, you're probably going to be very aware of the fact that this one card has completely and utterly changed the game, at least until it gets banned. So what are the downsides to Soul Charge? Well, it's very expensive. If your deck runs Solemn Warning, Upstart, Instant Fusion, and whatever other life point manipulation, you're automatically going to create a pretty large chasm in life between you and your opponent. Now, the question of whether or not life points matter is a separate discussion in of itself, but for our disadvantages, it's pretty safe to say that the card has the drawbacks of costing life. You also cannot conduct your battle phase. Attacking, destroying monsters, reducing your opponent's life to 0 is obviously a very basic part of the game. Not being able to do that is quite obviously a drawback. This card, circumstantially, can be a pretty poor top deck. If you're stuck on less than 1000 life points, even if it's only at less than 2000 life points, one monster, two monsters, it might not be good enough to turn the game around for you, depending on what deck you play. I honestly tried to be as unbiased as possible in formulating this video. I honestly couldn't come up with more disadvantages. Let's put all pretense aside. This card is pretty busted. Does it really matter that you can't attack? If you can set up a board so inconceivably broken that no matter what your opponent top decks, it's going to be GG next turn when you attack, then who cares about the one turn delay? Obviously the game, as we know, has an out to everything. All cards can be counted, but what realistic chance do you have versus, say, a dragon player who soul charged for 5 and made like Stardusts and like 2 Draco sacks? So quite clearly the battle phase isn't everything. What about the life point costs? Well, if you can afford to pay 4,000 to 5,000 life points in order to set up an unbeatable board, chances are it doesn't matter. The only downside is late game. If you're dwindling on less than 2,000 life points, chances are you might not be able to pull it back even with one monster. But even then, on the other side, every fairly competitive deck in the game currently, realistically Soul Charge for just one monster, and suddenly the whole match is turned upside down. Soul Charge on a Kyrkion, Leo, Fernie Archfiend, Wolfbark. Basically every deck in the game has one card they can Soul Charge that can totally change everything, even without their battle phase. Well, what does this mean for the game as a whole? This card is too powerful. The way I see it, any deck which can abuse Soul Charge is probably going to be the new best deck. The most obvious of these is Dragons, as proven by the recent ARG series. Dragons have access to a myriad of different level 8 synchros, which all do different things, and all do very different things depending on what situation they need at the time. They've got rank 7, rank 8 plays that they can have access to, depending on what they need at the time. And even if they Soul Charge for just one of these extra deck cards, it could be the end for their opponent. Now, Fernie is a new deck which has benefited immensely from Soul Charge. Soul Charge on just a single Archfiend can potentially make the deck go like +5. The UK Nationals proved this with the sudden surge of Infernity in the top cut. Dragons, surprisingly, were not as represented in the UK Nationals. In fact, the most recent UK Nationals, Dragons were one of the most underrepresented decks in the top cut. The deck, which in previous ARG series had almost half the top cut playing Mythics. Are British players just bad at Dragons? Or have other decks started to evolve in ways that help them incorporate the game-winning Soul Charge? My personal prediction, I feel like there is one deck out there which benefits the best from Soul Charge. Infernity. I feel like Infernity is going to be the new best deck. This deck can Soul Charge for literally one monster and it will set up such a broken board with breaks and barriers that very few decks can get around. Dragons are a powerful contender, but Dragons do not benefit as much as Infernity do from Soul Charging one monster. Dragons arguably benefit the most from Soul Charging multiple monsters, yes. However, in my opinion, Infernity requires the least amount of life points to make it work in a Soul Charge. Now, do the life points matter? Again, generally no. However, Soul Charge for 1000 is still better than Soul Charge for 4,000 to 5,000, which Dragons need to do so more than Infernity. And in perhaps one of those 50 games that you use Soul Charge, well, you might not have the life points to be able to set up. Unlike Infernity, which literally Soul Charge for one monster and they can plus. Maybe I'm a little biased because this is the deck I personally play, but regardless, Infernity is in such a strong position right now that even if you do get around those triple breaks and barrier, Soul Charge is still there to make them create a stupid board from the best toolbox in the game, the rank 4 toolbox, even without their back row. Anyway, so what deck do you think benefits most from Soul Charge? What decks do you think will start to shine even more now that Soul Charge is very much rooted in the core of most decks today? Are Dragons the best deck? Will Infernity become the new go-to meta deck? What about the incoming support of Madolch and Angeli? Leave your opinions in the comment section, like and subscribe, and let's hear your thoughts.